Okay, well, welcome everybody on the panel. Hello, Marie Theres out there in the middle of the night in France. And we'll keep an eye on you in case you start dozing off. So I'm so glad to be here tonight with you and talk to you about not just the 19th Street women, but their legacy. So as an art historian, my field of specialty is women artists, American women artists in particular. So I really love the concept of this exhibition that takes a now historical period and sees where its branches have reached to, let's say. And so let me just give you a little bit of background on why I think the 9th Street Show is so important, and then we'll turn to our panelists and talk about the growth that came out of that period in the New York School and how it still lives on today. So as Vicki said, the 9th Street Show was just a really seminal event in the New York School moment. It took place in 1951, and it was a DIY type of exhibition because, and in many periods over our history, artists felt they weren't being represented by galleries or being recognized for the work they were doing, so they decided to show it themselves in an abandoned or an empty, rather, storefront on 9th Street in 1951. And, they had a rule that anyone could enter, but they could only enter one work. And then a jury, Franz Klein is going to help to judge this, so no pressure, except for Franz Klein wasn't the Franz Klein we know today. Leo Castelli financed and hung it, but it was his first venture, so he was not who we know him to be. None of the artists in that show had yet achieved the reputation that they came to have. There were 72 or 74, depending on who's counting, artists in the show, and 11 of them were women. And I could say that Grace Hartigan was still going by the name George Hartigan at that point, so it doesn't quite even look like 11 when you look at the records. And those 11 women, like so many women artists in history before them and since then, faced their own kinds of obstacles to getting recognized and being part of that New York School movement. It's a pivotal moment in American art history because it's the post-war era, and the rise of abstraction in the US is sort of changing the tides and making the shift from Europe as the center of the art world to New York as the center of the art world, partly because so many Europeans had to abandon Europe during the war. I mean, Pete Mondrian was here in New York at the war years. So I think the 9th Street Show is important for a few ways, for a few reasons. One, because it was artists creating their own market, their own exhibition spaces, not counting on a gallery to promote them in a certain way, doing it for themselves. Also because, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's more than a 10% representation of women artists in the period. That's remarkable. And that it was judged by artists, and that it became kind of the kickoff to what really started happening in New York with the Abstract Expressionists. If you know an Abstract Expressionist work by name, that artist was in the 9th Street Show. So when we talk about today, and I have this little quote that I found about Joan Mitchell, but it kind of reminded me of what this exhibition is about, because this critic wrote of her that she extended the vocabulary of Abstract Expressionists, of her Abstract Expressionist forebearers. So tonight and today in this gallery, we're extending that vocabulary a little bit further. So I don't even know who to start with here, because all of you have experiences with some of the 9th Street women. So I think I might just like to ask, let's start with Bill, since I'm looking right at him. Since he's not a 9th Street woman, I guess. But I'd love to know your relationships. I know you've had friendships with some of these artists that we're talking about here. So,
for me, it's amazing, although I don't think it would mean the same thing to younger people or to older the generation that's now dead. But I've never been the only male painter in a show before, which is really amazing.
Good.
How does it feel? Yeah.
It's nice to be in a good. It's nice to be in such a good show. I've been in shows that aren't so good, so
With all
this is
men.
better. Well, with whoever. I mean, this is just a great show. It doesn't matter, but it's nice. What was the question?
So I know that everybody here has connections to the 9th Street. Some of the 9th Street women you're seeing here, so we've got Lee Krasner, Elaine de Kooning, Joan Mitchell, Grace Hartigan. So who were your connections with? Friendships even?
Mainly with Joan Mitchell. Mm-hmm. I mean, she was one of the most important painters in my life. And my friendship with Marie Theres and Mary Paige are very long. I mean, I've known Marie Theres longer than I've known almost anyone. And they're inextricably linked with my memories of Joan.
So how did you come to meet Joan then?
I was living in Paris on a travel. Well, I saw her show at the Whitney in 1974, and I remember walking through it. I'd gone to see Alice Neal's show, and they overlapped a week. So I got to see Joan's show, and I truthfully, I didn't get it when I first saw it. I mean, I thought they were beautiful, and I loved the color, but I wanted to be a figure painter then. And then a few years later, I was in, or 8 years later, which was longer in those days for me, I was in Paris on a travel prize for 5 months, and I met all these guys who were students at the École de Beaux-Arts, and they asked me, they liked American abstract painting, but they'd never heard of Joan, Stephen Korn, or Philip Guston, who I thought were the best ones. And my friend Jane Piper, who was the other painter that was important to me, sent me some little reproductions of their work, all in black and white. And this one Greek painter who was living in Paris knew Joan's work, but he was sure that she was a man because of Joan Miro. And he said she's having a show at Jean Fournier.
So did Basil thought Joan Mitchell was a man also. Yeah.
And
Sorry.
That's all right. And there was, well, he paid for that. Though.
Yep. That's another story, right?
Yeah. And I found the gallery, and I walked in the day she was hanging her show, and she gave me a beer, and I helped them hang the painting, The Goodbye Door, by turning, and it weighed a ton. We had to turn it around after screwing it together, because it was 4 or 5 panels. And then, I was 22 years old or 21, and everyone's nice to you when you're 21. So they all took me out to dinner, and then the next week was my birthday, and I took a chocolate cake out to Joan's for lunch, and she loved chocolate cake, which is almost as much as whiskey. And then it took from there, and we certainly had ups and downs.
Yeah.
And it's made me never hesitate to run.
So you were in Paris at the École, or studying as a student.
I was just there. I wasn't
Yeah,
at the
at the
École.
École.
I just met kids.
But I want to see if we can test our connection to Marie Theres, because she's originally born in Germany. Of course, she's living in France, but she was a student at the Pennsylvania Academy in this period. So Marie Theres, how did you come to know it was Joan that you had a relationship, yes?
It was with Bill. And I met her because Bill had met her the year before, or maybe even 2 years before. I think I met her in 1983. And I was already living in Paris by then.
So Bill is our linchpin here, and then that leads us to Mary Paige, who you two knew each other.
And we met at Joan's opening at the Corcoran
At the Corcoran, yes, but
in '88.
I had seen a show of Monet's Gardens at the Met. That's how, and I thought I have got to go paint Giverny. And so I had a friend at the National Gallery, and he arranged for me to go. And so I didn't meet Joan the first year that I was at Giverny, but I did meet her the second year, because I just had a friend, Jean-Marie Tillegois, remember?
Yeah.
And I said, I really want to meet Joan Mitchell. He said, well, call her at your own risk. So I called her, and she said, come on down, and in Vitalia. And so I went there, and I was kind of terrified, because I'd heard about her.
As one should be, I think.
Yeah. But then we were, and I drank half a bottle of Sancerre, with her that afternoon because I didn't want her to think I was a square and didn't agree. So somehow I made it back to Giverny. But then we started going to, I started going down to visit her. And I think, as Bill knows, she'd driven everybody else away because she was extremely difficult. And so I think by the time I came around, she was probably glad to have somebody.
Yeah.
Well, she was very fond of Mary Paige, and she had a little picture of hers up in her bedroom for
She did.
several years.
Yeah, she kept it on.
And she didn't have anything else in her bedroom.
Well, it was very nice of her.
Yeah.
But I remember I thought, these pictures, that water lily or da-da-da-da from Giverny, I'll let her see some of those. And I think she'll like these. They're kind of abstract. She looked at it and she said, okay, I'm going to use Joan Mitchell language. And she looked at it and she said, too fucking much green. And I said, oh, okay.
Yeah, so some real mentoring.
Absolutely. But there it is.
Yeah.
At any rate, no, but I like, for mentors, I like truth tellers.
Yeah.
I mean, like Grace Hartigan. I was so happy to become friends with Grace. I mean, I have wonderful stories with Grace.
And there are Grace works up front as well, so not to just focus on Joan, Grace. And Melissa, you had a mentorship really with Helen Frankenthaler.
Well, it wasn't quite a mentorship, but I was a student at NYU, and at that time, painting was dead. A teacher of mine said 6 times in my life, painting's been dead. Anyway, and the head of the art department started walking around looking for a painter. And then he found me and he said, you're a painter, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, you want to go to Yaddo? I said, what's that? He said, come. And I just happened to have my slides. In those days, we had slides, right? And he said, okay, yeah, okay. Now you have to call Helen Frankenthaler. And in those days, I could hardly say my name out loud. I mean, I was so intimidated by everything. But I knew it was important. So I called her, but she wasn't home. And then one day I left a message. I was a big girl, I left a message. And one day I got a call, and it's, hello, this is Helen Frankenthaler. And I realized if you announce your name, nobody says, who's calling? So that was a lesson right away. I had a lesson on how to present yourself, right? And I do that now. I go, hello, it's Melissa Meyer. And so then I went to Yaddo, thanks to Helen, and met her afterwards. And she used to always, I'd see her in different openings and things. Like she was honored one year at Skowhegan, and I was there. And I didn't really pursue a relationship with her because she needed a kind of attention that is not my style. So, but she was always happy to see me. She always recognized me and all that. And the last time I saw her, she wasn't well, and she was actually in a wheelchair. And that was kind of sad, but she was still beautiful, And I love her work. So.
And I like, especially when I think back to that quote about Joan, about the translation, right, forward of the New York School of their work forward. I actually really like how Cheryl has totally repositioned, right? The rest of these Ninth Street women had a certain expressionistic, abstract quality that we see coming through with the gestures and all sorts of things like this. But you're pinpointing something different in Lee's work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think of a quote that Lee Krasner said, that art is like a living statement. So it's kind of like, she didn't, from what I've read, she didn't want to be known as an abstract expressionist because she thought it was too repetitive. And I have that manner of working where I change a lot what I'm doing. And sometimes I look at other people and, they're always working in this series and it hangs together, in a good way. And so I felt like Lee Krasner, she allowed herself the change that women need, because she wasn't a mother, but I was, and she did take care of Jackson Pollock. And I just felt very akin to her eclectic manner, and someone that kind of gave me kind of a strength to turn inward, because she was very psychological in her work, and that's what she wanted to do more than the men did. And so that to me is women's issues, and my new work really deals with that. And so that's the connection that I have with her. And she gave me, not my mentor, but in a way, I like her character a lot.
Now, Lee Krasner is an artist that, you know, I'm not even saying that I'm that old or anything like this, but as I was being trained, you'd see maybe one image, and you were always, the sentence always started off with wife of Jackson Pollock, right? So many of the women abstract expressionists of this time, or the New York School women, were battling on that front as well to be an artist in their own right, but often were connected to male artists, whether it was someone they were in a relationship with, or so with Helen Frankenthaler, her relationship with Clement Greenberg put her right in the center of the art world as well. And Lee Krasner changed her style so many times over the course of her career, and was so critical of her own work that she destroyed so much of it. Many people thought she stopped making art when she married Jackson Pollock, and that was not the case. And so I think I see the sort of legacy, the influence of Lee Krasner is that always trying something different, always going in a new direction, and not staying, you know, who knows what Jackson Pollock would have done had he not, you know, crashed the car, but he was holding on to that style for a fair bit of time. So actually, since Cheryl's mentioned what she's doing now, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the works that you're seeing here in this room a little bit. Anybody want to talk about a work in particular that they can see of theirs, or maybe somebody else's? Mary Paige, you want to tell us a little bit about, you know, the works that we're seeing on view here?
Well, I'm really looking over the trees.
Oh, yes, the trees are good, because I think people who know your work would not right away recognize your, yeah.
See, I love to do trees with no leaves because they remind me of figures, dance-like, and I love to draw, and to me, drawing is the most economical way to make a complete statement. So I think line is very important to me. And that also, I mean, I'm going back to the poets again,
Yeah.
with the line, because I love the way that Joan and Grace were such great friends with poets. And they loved poetry and loved the line. And I remember being at Joan's one time when she said, "Yeah, Sam, I'll meet you at the Dome." And I said, "Oh, was that Samuel Beckett?" I mean, who's one of my most favorite writers. I think I've seen Waiting for Godot 10 times. And she said, yes. And it was that, I love their relationship to the poets and the line. And it's all been very interesting experience. But I'll talk more about Grace later. They were tough critics. You don't want mentors to say, "Oh, that's wonderful." You want them to tell you the truth. And you know, tell you what's wrong.
Yeah,
If they know the truth.
I mean, who cares?
You know, thick in the skin a little bit too.
Oh, no.
Because they, artists that they were in the time that they were, had to have thicker skin than most, I would imagine. So that's a key trait. So I want to jump back to Marie Theres over there and ask you about, I know you can't see the works of your own that are in the gallery, but I'm wondering about the paintings that you have on view here, and if you could tell us a little bit about them and your style or the period that we're looking at in your works. And, you know, let's direct people's eyes. I guess it might be.
They're all the other.
Yeah, I was going to say tough for everybody to see them, but they're in the back room here behind us. Can you tell us a little bit about these works?
First of all, the work you have, they were all done last year, really. I mean, it's like they were done when we were locked down here in the south of France. And it was, in fact, the first year where I was almost 10, 12 hours a day in my studio. I had never done that before. And it was something which I, even though we were all a bit scared and nervous about the situation, I really enjoyed being completely focused on my work. And so that is a very special time, of course. And my work, of course, is very floral or very much landscape orientated, but it's mostly about color, I think, and the space I can create using the botanical or floral elements.
Yes, I do have, and everybody can probably pick up one of these if you don't already have. And I do know that, as we mentioned, here is one of her works. So when you go back to the room in the back, and so Marie Theres, it's the one that's in the publication, and I have to put on my glasses. Cobalt Blau. Yeah. So I should mention, besides this, you can also get a copy of the Ninth Street Women book here, which is by Mary Gabriel. And if you want the in-depth story, and she uses first names of Mary, Grace, Joan, Elaine, and who did I miss? Helen. That is the source. And it's sort of amazing that there was a show a couple years ago in Denver that covered the abstract expressionist women, and it just goes to show that women's history is still being written. There's much to do in this yet as well. But this, what Marie Theres mentioned made me wonder, Cheryl or Melissa, in the last year, in this lockdown period, how has your work changed? This is certainly something that is unique for artists of the 21st century now.
Right. Well, I don't think my work's changed, but I changed. So, and I actually moved my studio into the same building where I live. And actually, Helen Frankenthaler once lived in that building. It's kind of funny. There's a picture I think in Ninth Street Women of her living in London Terrace. And I always wanted to live in London. And never did, but now I live in London Terrace. Anyway, so I moved and it was so interesting to see all my old work and move it around and reconsider what I did and wondered, how come, why didn't I ever sell this painting? What happened with this painting? And things like that. And I'm completely organized. But now I'm working on a very large painting, at least large for me, 72 by 96 inches, and I'm actually responding to two paintings that belong to the Rockefeller Collection. Nelson Rockefeller owned these paintings. He had a very famous curator named Dorothy Miller, and she bought these two paintings, and I'm responding to the paintings. It's going to be called A Nod to Grace. And I met Grace. She was very rude to me. And it was so interesting. And I thought, I'm never going to be like that to younger artists. It's sort of not necessary in a way. But John Bernard Myers introduced me to her, and he was all excited about me and my work, and that's what she didn't like. So it was too bad. It was too bad because I really admired a certain period of her work also, in particular. So, so I'm working on this large painting and smaller ones and like that. So in my new studio.
Cheryl, did something change about your practice this year?
Well, COVID definitely gave me some time, but these particular drawings I started before COVID. So I actually embraced COVID. I was very pleased with what was happening. I mean, not that I liked what was happening, but it was really nice just to really turn inward, because I'm inward anyway. So it was fitting for me, and it really gave me the opportunity to make more of it and really think about it all the time. I mean, I think about it a lot, but it's hard to find the time to do it all the time. So that was really fantastic for me. I do work in my house, and I did get more organized. And before I started making these, I started making these drawings because I just wanted to pare everything down to something just very simplistic. And that was really helpful because what was happening to the world was people were turning to their priorities. And so that was also a very fitting thing to do, just to pare things down to bare necessity, just like, you know, a fountain pen, a dip brush is what I use, or a brush and ink on various papers. So I'm starting to use color now. You know, it's interesting. You know, life is kind of returning back to normal, and I'm starting to use more colors. And I also want to start making some larger things because I am looking at the 9th Street women more now. And they did a lot of things on paper because they were poor, one, you know, and their work was enormous. So how do you do that without a lot of money? So I don't know if I was quite aware of actually what they used. And so that's extremely interesting to me. They would take paper and they would glue it on the canvas. So I've been trying to figure out too, like, how do you make something really, I've made large things, but not excessively large. So, so I'm looking at that work more and I'm excited to do that.
I almost brought this catalog of Lee Krasner's last show at Casman of her collages. Did anybody see it? And that would be something interesting for you to see. And also in the catalog, there's a picture of her and her setup. It was so funny. Like, she had these 2 boxes, like corrugated boxes, and then her work on top of it. So that became like the table. And then she was cutting these collages. And she even included a Pollock drawing in it.
Yeah, she would cut up some of his work and cut up her own work as well. But I'm a house painter by trade, actually, for 30 years, and so I'm actually used to working on very large surfaces, but making a large painting is kind of different. So I've always looked at walls of this big abstraction, because when you are plastering and doing that kind of stuff, they become an abstract painting, you know. But so I've never, you know, this is kind of like a new thing for me. Yeah, cool.
So I have several more questions, but I know you're all here to see and meet the artist as well. So I'd love it if anyone here would like to ask a question of our distinguished panel while we have them on the spot, right?
I'm going to start.
Yeah.
Because I have a question. Melissa, just before we sat down, you said you met Marie Theres Berger.
Oh, yes.
And I thought that would be very interesting if you could tell us when you met her if there was anything that she said that was illuminating to you, or was it just sort of a brief encounter, or, you know?
Well, I went to a couple of lectures that she gave in New York, and then and she signed my book. And I said my name, and she said, "Oh, I'm honored." She knew my work, which was kind of, or she was being nice. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. But it felt good. And she worked 7 years on that book. And what can I say about it? Oh, I think it started with Grace Hartigan. I think that she was going to do something with Grace, and then she saw that there was something else. There was another story. And it's really a chronicle of a time period.
Yeah, and what Mary Gabriel does in this book, it's not just a portrait of each one individually, it's a group portrait, right? And that is something that hasn't even really been done with the men of the Abstract Expressionist movement. Each one gets their own book, their own saga, their own tale. But Mary Gabriel weaves these stories together, just as, you know, they're all woven into your lives and work, too.
Also significant others.
Also, what?
Significant others.
Yes,
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
there were plenty of them around.
Yes. I mean, I do believe you need a scorecard as you're going through to see who's with who in that moment. But you know, that's another part of it. Partnerships within the art world, whether it's a critic, Clement Greenberg, or another artist, or, you know, these
Poets.
relationships, poets, yes.
Philosophers.
One of my favorite stories in the book is, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but this very large Pollock painting was $10,000, and the Museum of Modern Art wanted it, but they didn't have the money. Alfred Barr couldn't get them $10,000 together. And then Pollock died. And then he went back to Lee and said, I have the $10,000. And she said, it's now $30,000. And then the Modern bought that painting. So then he had to go back and buy another painting for $30,000. And he was shocked. He said, but Lee. And she said, Pollock's dead. And the story is also that she kind of single-handedly raised the prices of the abstract expressionists.
Yeah, because at that point, then you couldn't sell a de Kooning for less than a Pollock, and the cycle was kicked off.
What sort of interaction did some of these artists have with Mercedes Natter and the New York School?
Oh. Well, I've met her. I met her. She was Arthur B. Call's daughter, right?
Yes.
And very involved with the studio school, the New York Studio School on 8th Street. I'm trying to remember.
Bill?
I only know what Joan said about Mercedes, but I don't think you'll like it. But Joan didn't, she said things bad about everybody. I mean, including all of us, to each other, not to our faces. Sometimes, a lot to our faces.
Yeah.
But she just said she made Mercedes she went to a psychiatrist who'd written a book called Active Passive, Adrita Fried, who she made all of us read it. Or the first year I was there, everyone read it, Joyce Pensado and everyone else. And she said she made Mercedes go see the psychiatrist, and that the psychiatrist fell asleep. That's all I during the session. So everything's funny eventually.
In some ways, her work didn't have the ambition that, is that unfair to say?
No, you don't have to be fair. You should say what you feel.
Her work was not ambitious in its commitment, in its scale, in its marks, She was too much in awe of...
Men.
Right.
Yeah.
She was very beautiful. That didn't help in some funny way, right? And so...
Yeah. And not to throw us off that track, but we haven't talked about Elaine de Kooning too terribly much, and she, and Grace, in her later years, did a lot of teaching. So in that way, whether their students looked up to them or, were influenced by them, but they had an impact on a next generation. So any of you teach?
Yes. No, but I've done workshops.
Yeah.
Plenty of them. But at the Maryland Institute, Grace's students loved her. And she was such an inspiration to them. And that meant a lot to her teaching, giving back. And then once Grace stopped drinking, because they were all alcoholics. I mean, I took a theater critic over there to Frank Getline to meet Grace because he was wild to meet Grace. I said, oh, sure, come on over. Well, I ended up going out and buying an extra bottle of scotch for him, and I finally said, Frank, you've got to review something tonight at the Arena Stage. I have to take you home. And Grace, after that, stopped drinking. And, I mean, she was quite not, they all were alcoholics. And I said,
was.
Grace, what made you stop? And it was wonderful. She just said simply, I wanted to live. And she helped a lot of people. She went to Father Martin, outside of Baltimore. But she was a good mentor for a lot of people. But she was tough, too. When I first met her, she looked at the painting of mine, and, I thought, well, this is kind of more apt. She said, not enough tooth to it. Well, I kind of understood when she said it wasn't gritty enough. But then it was wonderful because here was tough Grace, and when she was in a nursing home, I would feed her ice cream. And she would go, and I want to write a poem called Feeding Grace. Because she was wonderful up until the last, and my husband Tom, we went to see her about a week before she died. And so it was a very good relationship. And I did take her a catalog from a show I was having in Washington, and she looked at it and she said, "Yeah, Paige, you finally done it. Finally done it, Paige." She called me Paige. I mean, you never know, but it was a great relationship because I learned so much about just life in general being with these people, particularly through the poets, and they were all good friends with the poets, which I love that too.
I wanted to say that, oh, okay.
Oh, she was a great friend of Frank O'Hara's. Grace was. And then Jerome Manley Hopkins, you know, I mean, Joan, they all loved poetry. And they all loved writing. They were very literary people, along with, you know, they were just very bright people. We know that, don't we? I mean, sometimes it was.
I was going to say that Elaine de Kooning was a very good writer also.
She was a good writer. Oh, she was wonderful. I had dinner with Elaine and Grace in Baltimore, and we all wore hats. I remember sitting at the restaurant, we all had hats on. It was a wonderful conversation, yes. And then, of course, with Barney Rossett before, and then Joan, oh my God, talking about drinking, I'll end up with that. But she had a show at the Corcoran. And the Kinneys, who were great, Gil Kinney, they're big art collectors in Washington. She was awful. She cussed out the curator from the Corcoran. Oh, it was terrible. You know, how'd you get that job? Who are you sleeping with? You know, I mean, that's how she did. So the next day, I talked to her on the phone, and she said, "Was I bad?" I said, "Joan, you were really bad." But, you know, at any rate, she was bad. But she was a wonderful painter, and she was a good friend, and she's inspired a lot of people.
She was, I mean, I would just say that, I mean, I always talk about Joan's drinking and her impossibility, but the last time or the second to last time I stayed with her, I was there a few weeks, and when I arrived, she said, "I know you hate it when I argue with you. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to argue with the other painters who are staying here." There were two others. And we're going to all get along. And she gave me a key to her studio and said, "You can paint in here from," she usually painted from around 11 or 1 in the morning until 6 in the morning. And so she said, "You can paint here from the morning until about 4 when I come in just to take a look before dinner." And I would hang up my watercolors on the wall. I was just doing works on paper. And then she would rearrange them all. And she said, "You have to have them all lined up in the same size paper." But then after I left, I realized, so there would be rows of different length rows of my watercolors opposite where she painted. And when I left, actually, about 6 months later, I saw her new work that she did. And it was all rows of fields. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. I mean, that's the way she was
That's
thinking
what she was
already.
thinking. She was arranging.
And I liked watching her painting she wasn't there, but a few times I was there when she was painting, but I would just see the paintings as they unfolded, and to me that's the best way to learn, was the people who took me into their studios and let me just look like every third or fourth day. I learned more about painting than anything, visually, than anything I could have learned if they'd been talking to me.
And I wanted to say something about Joan Mitchell's last works. I think she saved the best for last. And the show at David Sverner's gallery of her last works, one of the paintings that she made that was actually the year, I think maybe a little bit before she died. And there's no sign of pain in that painting.
Yeah.
It's like when you look at Matisse who, his last works are so spirited and full of joy and light and all that kind of, and he was sick. He was very ill. He was probably in a lot of pain, but not in the work. And I really admire that.
I think it's important too, it's come up a couple of times, that these women, for as gritty and as tough and determined as they were, to be involved with this New York school, not they all, but so many of them had very, I don't know, traditional modernist influences, whether it's Monet or Matisse was a big influence among many of them. Van Gogh, I know for you, not Van Gogh,
Cézanne.
but
Cézanne,
Cézanne for you, Van Gogh for others, you know, and as an art historian, that makes my heart very happy, because it's sort of all, you know, kind of this circular effect that at least our artists are appreciating what's come before, and that's really what we're doing, and what Vicki is doing in this show here is connecting that generation now past of the 9th Street legacy, or the 9th Street women, with what's going on, just as could we have gone back to 1951 and seen what their influences were at that time. So I think we are going to adjourn, so you can now take a new look at these images afresh, and a new hors d'oeuvre. And now that you know who our artists are, you can, you know, just corner any one of them for more stories. And we thank you, Marie Theres, for joining us. I know you can't make